Live from Indianapolis, the U.S. Senate primary debate, sponsored by the Indiana Debate Commission.
Good evening from Indianapolis and welcome to the Indiana Debate Commission's second season of debates. This one featuring the 5 gentlemen seeking the Republican nomination for the United States Senate. I'm your moderator, Amos Brown, and for the next hour, voters will ask the questions and Hoosiers watching and listening to 40 television and radio stations and websites, and Friday night at 9 on C-SPAN will hear the candidates' answers. So let's meet them. Marlin Stutzman of Howe is a farmer. He was elected to the Indiana Senate in 2008 after serving 3 terms in the Indiana House of Representatives. Richard Bainey of Fishers owns a residential plumbing company. He is a founder of the Indianapolis Tea Party organization, and he's a community volunteer. John Hostetler of Blairsville is an author and speaker. He was elected to represent the 8th Congressional District in 1994 and served 6 terms. Don Bates, Jr. of Winchester is a financial advisor. He is a board member of the Wayne County Chamber of Commerce and a past president of the Richmond Rotary Club. Dan Coates of Indianapolis is an attorney. He is a former United States ambassador to Germany and served in the United States Senate from 1989 to 1999. Now, the campaign has drawn lots for their candidates' positions on the stage and the order in which they will answer the questions. I'll announce the length of time each candidate has to answer a question. Most will be 1-minute answers, with the final answer 90 seconds. But I may announce that one's answer length will have to vary to get us to that final question. And as moderator, I may have to cut off one of these 5 gentlemen if they exceed the time to answer a question, and I hope that doesn't happen tonight. Now, our questions come from Hoosier voters and were reviewed by a committee of the Debate Commission. The candidates know to use only small notes and no props. So let's meet our first Hoosier voter. Jeffrey Miller is a banker from Granger, Indiana. Jeffrey, thanks for coming to Indianapolis. What is your question for the candidates?
Thank you. Good evening. My question is, what is your idea of a representative government? And given an important decision, would you vote the will of the people or vote your own mind regardless?
Each of you will have 60 seconds to respond, and by previous agreement, Marlin Stutzman will answer this one first. Mr. Stutzman.
Okay, well, thank you, first of all, to the Indiana Debate Commission for hosting us. Jeffrey, I appreciate the question, and I think that's one of the questions that a lot of people are asking themselves today. Where do our representatives and how do our representatives represent us as people? And I believe that as a representative for the people, first of all, we are elected. We go out, we campaign, we make our case to the people and ask them for their support and to be a part of that dialogue and to be a part of the debate. I believe for myself that I would, first of all, have my personal convictions that I would always view as very important to me, and would that particular piece of legislation break my personal convictions and really the constitutional parameters for our federal government. Second of all, I believe it is so important that we listen to the people and those who have elected us to office and to have that dialogue, because that is what builds trust with people, is when you're communicating and when you're listening and being part of the conversation, and that way you can better represent those who are in, those that you represent back at home. I think it's important for us to make sure we're listening and have that dialogue.
Mr. Sussman, thank you. Richard Bainey.
Again, thank you, Amos Brown, for being here this evening and hosting this debate. You know, Jeffrey, a great question. This is where I've come from this past year, from the whole Tea Party movement side of things, and that's what I've heard from literally thousands of Hoosiers across our state that have this concern that we, with politicians and politics as usual, that we strayed away from citizen representation, and that is the outcry that I've heard this past year, that we want to get back to a people that we are, that our founders had in mind with citizen representation. That's why the qualifications for Senate are very clear and have to do with basically age and citizenship, as opposed to whether or not you're wealthy or have served in some other political office, so that your neighbor would go and represent you, that it would be an honor and not a career. So I believe in citizen representation, and I will lead with my convictions, my conservative convictions, and by the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Bainey. John Hostetler.
Thank you, Amos, and thank you to the Indiana Debate Commission for allowing us this opportunity. And Jeffrey, excellent question in that one of the 5 of us before you tonight will take an oath ultimately to uphold the Constitution. That is essentially our job description as a United States Senator, as a member of Congress. I took that oath 6 times prior. And The people, when I took that oath of the 8th District of Indiana at that time and Indiana in the future, will know that it's my obligation to uphold that Constitution and to represent them in that capacity. I'm holding town hall meetings all across the state of Indiana to talk to Hoosiers about how I would represent them in the United States Senate in fulfilling that duty, that sacred call to uphold the Constitution and not violate it in my actions, in my service to the document and to the people.
Don Bates.
Amos, thank you. Jeffrey, thank you for the question. Fellow Hoosiers, thank you for joining us tonight. Representative government means when the people speak, the government listens. And what we've seen over the past few years is that government is not listening to the people. A poll came out this week showing that 4 out of 5 people do not trust the government. What we've seen again and again is our representatives and our senators go to Washington and live happily ever after and ignore the voice and the will of the people. That has to stop. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this reawakening in Indiana and in America. It's because Hoosiers and people around our nation are realizing that their voices in the past have not been heard. And they are crying out for their voices to be heard. And it's one of the reasons I'm running to be your United States Senator. I'm going to Washington, D.C. to represent you and to listen to you. Dan Coates.
I thank you also, Amos, and I thank the Indiana Debate Commission for hosting this event. Yes, we do take a solemn oath. Those who are fortunate to be elected, one of us will be elected and will take that oath to uphold the Constitution. And yes, representative government does mean representing the people, and you can't do that unless you communicate with the people. Listen to what they have to say. Had this president done that, he would have not advanced some of his massive spending agenda on the American people, and particularly on the Indiana people. But I also believe that it's important for a representative to state to the people that he represents or she represents, to state their basic convictions. Sometimes the popular mood moves the populace in a way that, say, they want to legalize drugs. If it goes against your basic convictions, you have to state to the people, these are not what I believe, and I cannot support that. They then have the opportunity to vote you out of office if they don't like your position, but I think it's very important to let people know your basic fundamental convictions and then communicate with them directly.
Thank you. Joan Rapkin is from Indianapolis, but she couldn't join us tonight at the WFYI studios, so she recorded her question for the candidates.
My name is Joan Rapkin. I'm from Indianapolis, and I would like to know, what do you propose to do about the lack of bipartisanship in Washington?
As we rotate the order of answering the questions, we begin this time with Richard Bainey. Another 1-minute answer, please, sir.
You know, Joan, a great question. It depends on what you talk about bipartisanship. You know, right now there's this idea of compromising being very good for who we are as a people, very good for America. I will not compromise when it comes to our constitutional principles and values, our constitutional principles and values of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. So I will have no problem extending a hand across the aisle when we're discussing what kind of paint color we want to have, want to paint the Capitol, or maybe what kind of jets we want to purchase. But when it comes to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and those principles that are important to who we are as a people, I will not compromise.
John Hostetler.
Joan, I believe that the people of the state of Indiana and the United States in general are going to be sending a message to Washington, D.C. in November later this year, and that message is going to be heard loud and clear on both sides of the aisle. And it's likely that there'll be a new majority, new leadership in Washington, very similar to what happened after the 1994 elections. And the members of Congress will get to work to doing the people's business. And there will be that mandate from the American people to work together in order to bring the federal government back to within its constitutional constraints, balance the budget and the like. And it's as a result of the people doing their job to maintain their own liberty that's going to be practiced in November of 2010 that I think we're going to see an outpouring of bipartisanship in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill especially.
Don Bates.
Joan, thank you for the question, and I'm sorry you couldn't join us tonight. Joan, my #1 responsibility is to represent you. If I can do that in a bipartisan manner, then I'm more than happy to. But even if I have to be partisan, if I'm representing you and doing the work that you want me to do, then I'm willing to go it alone as a partisan. One of the things that I've noticed in Washington, D.C. is that there seems to be a double standard. It appears to me that we want Republicans to be bipartisan, but there's really not this move for Democrats to be bipartisan, and I don't think that's fair. But my number one responsibility is to represent you, and if I can do that in a bipartisan manner, I'm happy to. We have to get our economy back on track. We have to do whatever it takes to put people in Indiana back to work, and I will do everything I can to do so in a bipartisan manner, but I will do my utmost to represent you.
Dan Coates.
Currently in Washington, there are two very different views of America. The view that was represented here this evening by the 5 people speaking to you is an entirely different view than what's coming out of the White House and the Democrat-controlled Congress. That makes bipartisanship very, very difficult. Two parties looking down an exactly opposite path. But the issues that our country faces are issues that we have to rally around and support. And we have to support on the basis of conservative principles because those are time-tested principles that have worked. What we're doing to our economy right now with this administration is leading us down a dangerous and disastrous road deeply into debt. To solve that problem, we need support from the other side. And as the people they represent see this going on, they have to support that, and they should come our way on that. Secondly, the threats from abroad. We need bipartisanship in dealing with people who want to kill us and take our country down. That is something that we have to reach above party politics and ideology and support each other in protecting America.
All right, Marlon Stutzman.
Well, Joan, thank you for your question. Right now in Washington, what we see is a difference of what the American people are telling me. And when I've traveled this state, as I've traveled the state over 25,000 miles, talking with Hoosiers and listening to them and hearing what they believe, what I'm finding is that there's a common thread through us as Hoosiers. We believe in the Constitution. We believe in freedom. We believe in God. We believe in our families. We believe in our communities. And we believe that Hoosiers are the answer to our problems, not always the government. And that's the problem right now in Washington, D.C. We have politicians who are trying to cram legislation down our throats and taking over major portions of our economy, for example, the health care legislation that just passed. I believe that if they would listen to Hoosiers and realize the effects that they have by taking over more and more of our freedom, that people are going to react very strongly in this next election. I think bipartisanship is important on those issues that we agree upon, but there are going to be issues that we just have to agree to disagree.
All right, thank you. Matthew Daly's a lawyer and lives in Fishers, Indiana. Matthew, what is your question for our candidates?
Thank you, sir. My question is, if you were to be elected to the Senate, what would be the topic and purpose of the first bill you would draft and attempt to make into law?
Again, each candidate can take up to 1 minute to answer, and we'll begin this time with John Hostetler. Sir?
Well, legislation that I would introduce would have to deal with the deficit and with the debt. It is the single most important issue that is facing our country. The continual expansion of the federal government, most recently evidenced by a takeover of the health care system by the federal government, an incremental step, is such that it is important that members of Congress focus on this issue of the deficit and the debt. And so legislation that I would introduce would have to deal with a plan to bring the budget into balance as soon as possible. That would require a discussion of many issues, many topics across the board. And that is legislation that I would be introducing early on in my tenure in the Senate.
Mr. Bates.
Thank you so much for your question. On December 31st, 2010, the Bush tax cuts are set to expire. January 1, 2011, every taxpaying Hoosier is going to get the largest tax hike on a percentage basis in the history of our nation. We cannot afford to allow this to happen, especially in a time when our economy is struggling and many of you are out of work. We have 10% unemployment in the state of Indiana. You know people who are out of work. We have to get about the business of rejuvenating our economy without an artificial stimulus bill. The very first piece of legislation I will introduce will be to make those tax cuts permanent. If we do this, it will inspire confidence in the American people that we are serious about rejuvenating our economy, and it will help get us back on the road to recovery.
Mr. Coates.
For the same reason that the state of Indiana each year struggles at the end of the session to balance their budget, the United States Congress needs to struggle to balance the federal budget. Until we have a balanced budget amendment, that is a constitutional amendment forcing members of Congress to control spending, to control the growth of government, to stop government from exceeding its constitutional bounds, we will not have fiscal responsibility in this country. We have run up debt that is unconscionable. We are digging a debt hole that our children and grandchildren may not be able to dig out of. We need to force people. You send money to Washington, I guarantee you it will be spent. We have to have an imposition of those under oath supporting the Constitution of the United States disallowed from spending money and not balancing the budget and not bringing our fiscal situation into balance. People are depending on that. We are losing jobs. We are losing credibility around the world and support around the world because we simply cannot stay up with it, and we have to have that balance.
Time, sir. Mr. Stutzman.
Well, thank you for the question. I think as a small business owner, that's one thing that I bring to the table. And also as a part-time legislator here in the state of Indiana, serving in both the House and the Senate, I've never voted for an unbalanced budget and believe as well that we need to control Washington the same way. There should never be a budget that is imbalanced. It is only going to put us in a position where we would have to raise taxes and to only put our children at risk, whether it's through deficit spending, increasing the debt ceiling. I think it is very important for us to ask our federal government to do the same thing that so many families around the state of Indiana do, and that is to have a balanced budget. I think a balanced budget amendment is very appropriate and very needed in Washington with the trillions of dollars worth of debt. I would take concern and issue with one of my opponents, Senator Coates, voted for a debt ceiling increase. And I think that while we have disagreements, we cannot continue to borrow and spend, and we need to stop the imbalanced budgets that Congress continues to pass. So I think it is important to get our government under control of the spending that they have been producing.
Mr. Boehne.
Matthew, that's just the point. Our federal government is creating too much legislation. I'm asking Hoosiers to send me there to repeal and to pull back a lot of this legislation and mandates and regulations that the federal government is shoving down our throats. Look, this health care legislation must be repealed. It alone has changed the dynamic of who we are as a people. We are no longer a free people. There's not a free man and woman among us watching this program this evening. I will work, first of all, to repeal this legislation, for it is an economy killer, it is a constitutional killer, and it is a killer of our individual liberties.
All right, our next question is from a student's point of view. Ryan Gilliam is a student from IU Bloomington and is from Indianapolis. Ryan?
Hello, thank you. My question, do you think that taxes are a viable way of getting out of debt? And do you think that a limited federal government can exist in this day and age? Why or why not?
Let's start with Don Bates.
Thank you, Ryan, for the question. I have a lot of friends on the campus of IU, a lot of college Republicans who are supporting me. I'm glad you're here tonight. We must lower taxes in our nation in order to rejuvenate our economy. President Reagan proved that if you allow the American people to keep more of their hard-earned money, they know how to rejuvenate this economy. And yes, you can do both. We can lower taxes, and we can live within our means, and we can have a limited government. Now, that's going to force us to make some difficult choices. We have to acknowledge as Republicans that the spending binge that we have seen as of late didn't happen overnight. The Republicans were elected in 1994 with a mandate to straighten government. As my Congressman Mike Pence says so well, it only took them 12 years to lose their way. We have to rebuild trust in the American people with what we do in Washington, D.C.
Dan Coates.
Ryan, you've hit on a very important point here. Raising taxes assumes that government needs more money. Right now, our government is soaking up so much of our tax dollars and so much through taxes, so many of our dollars, and so much incentive is lost in providing support for small business, in providing relief for homeowners, relief for taxpayers, that our economy is stagnant. Government is bloated. It is doing way beyond what it's constitutionally required to do. It is spending money as if there is no tomorrow. And that is destroying our economy and putting us into a very, very difficult situation. Lowering taxes, not only Ronald Reagan, but John F. Kennedy lowered taxes and it stimulated the economy. But the big question is, what is the role of government? And how are we going to stop this ever-expanding, ever-bloated government? This recent health care plan is going to add tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people to the government rolls. The stimulus has added government workers, not private workers. We've got to stop the expansion of government.
Time, sir. Mr. Stutzman.
Well, I would agree. I think that our government can exist and can do better. We here in Indiana have done the same thing. In 2005, we had a $1 billion structural deficit. We've cut spending. We've eliminated that debt without raising taxes. If you lower taxes, keep taxes low, you broaden those opportunities for people, and you reduce the cost of business to government. You're not paying as much to the government, and you can instead put that money in your own pocket. You can invest it. You can put it towards your children's education. You have so many more opportunities, and I believe it's so important and vital right now with the massive amount of debt that we have in this country that we reduce spending and keep taxes lower. And I believe that that is what's going to get our economy moving. I come from northeast Indiana with Elkhart and LaGrange County with high unemployment rates, and we've seen what big government and big regulation, a lot of regulation can do to an industry. And we need sound policies like energy policies that will get our government, or get our economy moving again, rather than more government.
Mr. Boehne.
As one who's created million-dollar economies and created hundreds of jobs, I understand what it means to have low taxes. I know what it means to have the money to be able to buy additional equipment or employ new employees. So certainly we must make the Bush tax cuts permanent this year. But more than that, we must simply stop the spending. We have a $3.9 trillion budget that is one-third out of balance. One-third out of balance. That's $1.3 trillion out of budget. We simply cannot continue in that manner. We must stop the spending, and we must cut our budgets, and then make the Bush tax cuts permanent, and that will go a long way to help small businessmen like myself.
Mr. Hostetler.
Ryan, Ronald Reagan often said it's not that the government taxes too little, it's that it spends too much. And in that spirit, I have continually, consistently voted to cut taxes across the board in order to not only allow people to keep more of their money, but recognizing that they save, spend, and invest it much more wisely than bureaucrats or politicians. They have created the economy, created the jobs as a result of that saving, spending, and investing. So I oppose new tax increases to bring spending, to bring the budget into balance, but rather recognize it's that the government spends too much. The government spends trillions of dollars every year at this point. The question is not, can limited government be possible today? Limited government will take place if we do not take steps now to limit government deliberately. Government will be limited as a result of an economic disaster in the future that we must work to avert.
Thank you. You are watching and listening to the Indiana Debate Commission's debate of the 5 candidates for the Republican nomination for the United States Senate. Our next question comes from Barbara Royal. She's retired and lives up in Munster in northwestern Indiana. She recorded her question with the help of our friends of Lakeshore Public TV.
Would you support the legislation that will come before the Senate about the treaty President Obama signed with the head of Russia earlier this month for a reduction in nuclear arms by both sides and with verification? Thank you.
This is another 1-minute answer, please. Dan Coates, you can answer this one first.
Barbara, no, I will not support that until I find out all the details of that treaty. We have seen treaties proposed by presidents before that once you get into the details of that treaty, you find out information there that does not necessarily justify the decision. I just have to be frank with you. I think the foreign policy of this president is someone who has not had experience, someone who has gone around the world apologizing to our enemies, making excuses for America, not representing us in a way that I think we need to be represented. I believe in peace through strength. Ronald Reagan led that under that theme, and we saw the positive results that resulted from that. This treaty under this president is something that deserves great scrutiny. And while it's desirable to reduce the threat of nuclear weapons, I don't want to see the United States at this point giving that up, given the problems in the world and given the policies of this particular president.
Time served. Marlon Stutzman.
I agree with Senator Coates. I would not support this agreement. I think that it is very important and crucial for us not only to secure America, but also to protect our men and women who serve in our military. One of the constitutional requirements and responsibilities of our federal government is our national defense. And I agree as well that we need to make sure that we, as Americans, and we as the federal government, is doing that, fulfilling that responsibility and making sure that our nation is secure. We as Americans, we are the first to always go out and to help those countries who are in need, and after a natural disaster, we take care of those people who are hurting. And I believe that it is important for us to maintain our freedom through that strength that we have in our military. And I believe that if you weaken ourselves, if the President continues to weaken ourselves militarily, those countries that are wanting to do damage to our country and to hurt our freedoms are going to see that as a sign of weakness. And I believe it is very important that we stand strong in our military.
Richard Bainey.
No, Barbara, I will not support this treaty. I believe that our President has sent a very poor message to those who wish to do America harm. Specifically, we have an Iranian leader who has stood on our soil and said that he will kill Israel and he will kill Americans. And we must send a very clear message. This gentleman is bent on creating nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and a nuclear Iran would be unthinkable. And we need to send them a very clear-cut message that if they build it, we will come.
All right, Mr. Hostetler.
Barbara, I would not support this treaty because I think the President has gotten his priorities backwards, and that is before you move to disarm, limit the capability of striking back, we must first fully develop a layered national missile defense shield. When I was in the House of Representatives, it became the policy of the United States government to develop a layered national missile defense shield that would be able to defend us from not only long-range attacks from, say, Russia, but also short and medium-range attacks, so that we could preserve the security of our nation and all its territories. We must do that before we seek to disarm, because without that defense, without that capability, disarming would not be in the national interests of our country and would make us more susceptible to danger.
Don Bates.
Barbara, thank you so much for the question. I have to tell you, there are many times when I feel like I'm living through Jimmy Carter Part 2. One of my greatest disappointments with President Obama has been his foreign policy. In my opinion, he has insulted our friends and our allies, and he has apologized for our greatness to our enemies. I think it's the wrong move to make, and I would not support this treaty. I was deeply disappointed that he pulled back from the Czech Republic and Poland with the missile defense that we promised them under the Bush administration. I believe we're sending the wrong message. Instead of a message of leadership to our friends, we're sending a message of appeasement. And I think it's the wrong message to send, and I won't support it.
All right, our next question. Stephen Irvin lives in Portland, Indiana, and works in product management for a food processing company. Stephen, thanks for driving down here tonight. What is your question for our 5 candidates?
Where do you stand on any future semi-automatic firearms ban, national gun registration, and concealed carry license reciprocity?
Let's start with Marlin Stutzman.
Well, I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment and believe that, as George Washington said, it is the people's liberty's teeth, and that it is the Second Amendment for a good reason, and to protect the people of this great country. I would not support any additional restrictions on assault weapons. I do not believe it is necessary. I believe that we need to protect those Second Amendment rights. I know back in the 90s there were votes to ban assault weapons, and I think that we have to be very vigilant and careful in how the federal government infringes on our citizens' Second Amendment rights. We value our rights. We value those freedoms that we have that are guaranteed to us by the Second Amendment. And I believe that this election is very important. As we've already seen, the NRA is making a very clear statement about how they're going to endorse in this upcoming primary, or in the election. And so I think it's important for us as Republicans to stand strong on the Second Amendment issues, and would not support any additional repeals.
Richard Bainey.
Stephen, I believe the founders were very clear in their writing of the Second Amendment, that they were not talking about deer hunting or shooting clay pigeons for sport. They were talking about protecting oneself and one's family and one's republic. I believe that any attempt to deter or take away one's Second Amendment rights in any way, shape, or form is not appropriate to who we are as a people. It clearly gives teeth again to all the amendments. It has kept us a free and prosperous people, and I will work very hard to uphold and protect our Second Amendment rights.
Mr. Hostetler.
Steve and I oppose any new restrictions on firearm ownership. In fact, in 1995, I cast a vote to repeal the Clinton gun ban that was put in place by the Congress prior. I also oppose national gun registration and have worked to make sure that paperwork collected is ultimately destroyed within the time requirements of federal law, which previous administrations, the Clinton administration, was lax in doing. And then finally, with regard to reciprocity, I sponsored legislation in the House of Representatives to allow national reciprocity, to allow those individuals with conceal and carry from their state to conceal and carry to other states, given that the Congress has the authority under Article 4 to govern these and regulate these full faith and credit relationships between the states. I think that the Second Amendment is very clear and that we should not infringe on the right to keep and bear arms of our citizens.
Mr. Bates?
Stephen, thank you for the question. I will not support any legislation that hinders our right to bear arms. The Second Amendment goes to the heart of one of our fundamental liberties, and that liberty is the right for us to protect ourselves. You will notice that among most Democrats, there is a fundamental difference of opinion when it comes to the Second Amendment. It seems like they're always coming up with legislation that would hinder our right to bear arms. It's unfortunate that across the years there have been a few well-meaning Republicans who have joined them in such legislation. You have my word that I will not support any legislation whatsoever that would hinder your ability to bear arms.
Mr. Coates?
Nor would I. I would not support legislation in any of the three questions that were asked. The Second Amendment guarantees people the right, one of the very basic constitutional rights, to protect their home, to protect their family. It gives the right to sportsmen and gives the right to collectors to maintain weapons and keep weapons. That is a right guaranteed by the Constitution, is a right that has been supported by the Supreme Court, and is a right that ought to stay right where it is.
Elbert Bradshaw is from Carmel. Good evening. Welcome. What would you like to ask the Republican candidates for the U.S. Senate? Just step up to the mic, sir.
I'd like to ask the panel, if I may, how would you cut spending and attempt to balance the budget?
All right, let's start with Richard Bainey.
Very good.
60 seconds.
Yes, very good question, brother. You know, look, being the Tea Party guy, I like to go in there and rip everything out. But there's a reality that we're dealing with. You know, our economy is very sick. And to do such a thing would literally throw our economy into cardiac arrest. You know, I believe that we can take bold, practical action across the board. You know, nothing would be left off the table. I will take a businessman's approach and take a look at our budget and look at our expenses and look to make cuts across the board. But we must make the cuts. We must also take a look at it as a people. You know, these are entitlement programs. What are you willing to give up? And that is a question that each of us must answer for ourselves. And when your junior senator from Indiana starts making cuts, will you stand behind him? But we must start making cuts. Our nation is depending on it.
John Hostetler.
Well, Albert, it's an excellent question, and it will take a layered approach, given that this year, 1/3 of the Senate will be elected, re-elected, and so we are going to have numbers which we are going to have to work with in order to make the change in philosophy and the way of doing things in Washington, D.C. The first thing we must do is we must not allow for any new spending. When I was in Congress for 12 years, both under Democrat presidents and Republican presidents, Congress was continually lobbied for more new spending, and I opposed that. Then we must oppose increases in spending of previous programs. And ultimately, we must look across the board at reducing spending in all areas. My only exception would be in our national defense, given that the Constitution requires that the federal government have as its priority the defense of our country. But every other program would have to be on the table.
Time, sir. Don Bates.
Mr. Bradshaw, thank you for the question. Again, this is one of the ways Republicans lost the trust of the American people. It's one of the reasons why we lost in 2006 and then lost the state of Indiana to a Democrat for the first time since 1964 in 2008. We have to tackle this problem, but we must acknowledge that even Republicans lost their way. Now, I've been very specific and very clear about where we start. I'm not a politician, and I've always answered these questions very specifically. First of all, I'm asking congressmen and senators to take a 5% pay cut. I told you at the beginning of this debate, Americans do not trust government, and if we stepped out in front of the cameras and said we have cut our pay 5%, it would go a long way in rebuilding that trust. Secondly, after the Supreme Court takes down the health care bill, we must reform Medicare and Medicaid. We can and we must. Thirdly, we must reform Social Security for those my age and younger. Ages 40 and younger need to understand that Social Security for us must look differently if it is to be sustained.
Time, sir. Dan Coates.
Albert, thank you. I'm going to try to give you 3 or 4 quick points. There's lots of things we need to look at. First, no new programs. Even if it's a desirable program or a popular program, we cannot afford it. We're broke. So no new programs. Secondly, government does way too much. We need to get government back to its original purposes, and there's a lot of things that government can pass on to the states, or as the Constitution says, to the people. There are things that can be done outside of the federal government that are being done by the federal government because they don't trust the rest of us. Thirdly, line item veto. I authored the line item veto when I was in the Senate. It passed the House, it passed the Senate, it was signed into law by the President of the United States. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court threw it out. So we need to start there again because, as I said before, congressmen will spend anything you give them, and we've got to take that away and give the President that prerogative. Lastly, on defense. I am for a strong national defense, but to say we won't take a penny out of defense says that defense hasn't made a mistake in terms of their procurement. There are items there that have to come out. They're built for the Cold War, not for the wars that we're dealing with now.
Time, sir. Mr. Sussman.
Well, thank you for the question. As a small business owner, I've dealt with budgets that needed to be cut and finding ways of doing that. We've done that here at the state level. Under Governor Daniels' leadership, we have been able to balance our budgets and cut spending. I think there's 3 things that we could start on. First of all, I believe that we should eliminate earmarks. There is no need for earmarks to be spent right now when we're facing trillions of dollars worth of debt. With our children and our grandchildren having to pay for the frivolous spending that is going on right now from our federal government. I think, second of all, we need to look at every bureaucracy. Every department head needs to go and to deal with their specific department as a business owner. And how can I cut? We've cut here in Indiana almost 20% across the board. That's the same type of leadership we need in Washington. I think also that we can look at the Department of Education, which is a huge spender of those dollars. I think it's better suited for our states. Government that's closer to the people can serve the people better, rather than the federal government continually trying to find ways of spending more dollars.
Time, sir. Thank you. You are watching from Indianapolis the Indiana Debate Commission's debate with the 5 gentlemen who are running for the United States Senate in the Republican primary that will be on Tuesday, May 4th. Karen K. Leonard is a retired teacher from Indianapolis. Karen, welcome. Glad to have you. Kind of step up to the mic so these distinguished gentlemen can hear you. What is your question tonight?
My question is, by what parameters would you determine whether to support a nominee for federal office? For example, an appointee like a Supreme Court justice.
And we begin this time with John Hostetler.
Thank you, Karen. It's a very important question in that there must be a philosophy of government that underlies all of these decisions. The Senate is given the power to advise and consent. And that idea of consent is vitally important in that we should not look at every appointee that goes before the Senate as someone that has a pass because they've been chosen. And so what I would do is I would ask diligently of those nominees their political philosophy, their understanding of the Constitution and how they would apply it in their respective positions. I would not take part in a compromise as Senator Coates did in 1993, that would suggest that future nominations would be based on some nebulous agreement. It is as a result of diligence that we must make sure that every nominee will do that which they are tasked to do under the Constitution, the oath they will take.
All right, Mr. Bates.
Karen, thank you for the question. I'm not here tonight to talk about the past. I'm here to talk about the future. I'm gravely concerned about what the Supreme Court is going to look like by the end of President Barack Obama's first term in office, and hopefully his only term. I will weigh every nominee very carefully, but I will have to tell you, I'm probably biased from the get-go because I know the philosophy of this president, and I know how he's trying to shape the United States Supreme Court and the judiciary down the bench, and therefore I'm gravely concerned. I will look at their records. I will look at whether or not they have been a strict constructionist or if they have legislated from the bench in a way that proves to be a liberal activist. I'm very concerned about these nominees, especially with the retirement of Justice Paul Stevens, and I'm concerned about the future of the United States Supreme Court.
Mr. Coates.
Karen, the justices of the United States Supreme Court are there to defend the Constitution. They're not there to rewrite it. They're not there to interpret it so that they can advance their own ideology or their own policy projections as to what they think Congress should have done but didn't do, so they'll take over. That is not their constitutional prerogative, and they should not do that, and unfortunately they have. I was fortunate enough to be asked by President Bush to shepherd through the confirmation process Justice Alito. That took 3 hard months of a lot of work. I saw what he had to endure to get there, but there was a man faithful to the Constitution for what it says, not for what they wanted it to say. He was faithful to the rule of the law and faithful to the application of the law to that Constitution. Together with Justice Roberts from Indiana, we have 2 models of who we ought to support and the type of people we ought to support. Faithful to the Constitution, strict constructionists, Judge Roberts, Judge Alito's magnificent additions.
All right, Mr. Stutzman.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it is one that is very important in today's government, in our structure of government. The judicial branch is the 3rd branch of government. And I look at the judges as umpires to abide by to keep the rules of the game and not to be legislating new rules. I think it's very important in today that those judges who are nominated by our president for the Supreme Court understand that, and that they are not to be changing the law, they're to be interpreting it. I would agree as well that I think back in the 1990s when Senator Coates was there and voted for Justice Ginsburg, that sort of compromise is not good for the process. The confirmation hearings that go through the Senate are there for a reason. We don't give the president a pass. I think it's more important that we vet each one of those nominations for how they view the Constitution and what role they play in interpreting the law. So I would support making sure that we appoint strict constructionists to the Supreme Court.
Time, sir. Mr. Boehne.
You know, Karen, I have an American bias. I love our Constitution and I love life. And I believe that our Constitution protects life from conception, through sickness, through disability, through age, all the way to our Father in heaven calls us home. And I will not support or I will not vote to confirm any justice to the Supreme Court who will not publicly announce that they understand that our Constitution protects life and that they are pro-life.
Gentlemen, I'm sure you will agree with me that our questions from Hoosiers, again, demonstrates that Hoosiers, when asked, can come up with great questions. And these questions came through our Indiana Debate Commission website. Larry Alsbach is from Marion. He could not be with us tonight. Here is his question, and I'm going to read it exactly as he wrote it. What are your proposed plans on the North American Free Trade Agreement, known as NAFTA, and other trade agreements that allow companies to move out of the USA and still get tax benefits? And we begin with Don Bates.
Well, Larry, thank you for the question.
I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It'll be a 1-minute answer. I'm sorry. Go start again.
Thank you. Larry, thank you so much for that question. This question has come up on the campaign trail quite a bit. I've heard people say we need to abolish NAFTA, that the treaty was not good for America. And I'm sure there's validity to that point. But if you were to abolish the North American Free Trade Agreement, I can promise you that prices will triple in the United States of America. And that's not the plan of action that we want to take to rejuvenate our economy. It's not the right idea. Now, what can we do to protect and preserve jobs in the United States of America and here in the state of Indiana? Here's what I believe. I believe you do it through tax cuts. We're losing jobs to Mexico and to China, but we have the 2nd highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. Why don't we incentivize businesses to grow right here in our great state? I think you do it through tax cuts. Let's give them the incentive. Let's not penalize them for sending jobs elsewhere.
All right, Dan Coates.
Well, I agree with that from the standpoint that while trade agreements must be fair and we must scrutinize them very, very carefully to make sure they are fair, it is important as a nation, an exporting nation, that the United States be able to export to other countries. Indiana derives a great number of jobs from the export of goods, agriculture leading the way. And so we have to be very, very careful not to cut off our nose to spite our face. We need to preserve jobs, and we need to provide the basis for jobs to be preserved here in the United States. The incentives through lower taxes, lower regulations. This administration is imposing taxes and regulations on small business here, the greatest generator of jobs. Imposing that on Indiana, it is costing us a lot of money. It's costing us jobs for people, and it's forcing companies to think about outsourcing, and that's exactly the wrong direction.
All right, Mr. Marlon Stutzer.
Well, Benjamin Franklin said that no country was ever destroyed from free trade, and I think that what we have done with NAFTA has been one part of, it's been good, but on the other hand, we are hurting American jobs through higher taxes. As Don mentioned, we have the second highest corporate income tax. I think it is important for us to realize that when that money is not going to the government, it's going back into expanding an economy. It is growing jobs and producing and providing opportunities for our young people and for our country. I think that we need to lower taxes and to have less regulation, because what we're doing is creating an unfair level playing field for those companies right here in America. If we're going to restrict them and tighten them down when we have free trade, those companies and those jobs are going to start going elsewhere because it's easier to do business elsewhere. I think it's very important and vitally important for our economy to put people back to work, that we understand those business principles that made our country great, and that's free enterprise and the opportunity for businesses to grow because they're the job producers.
Time, sir. Richard Vaney.
You know, this is just a perfect example. If we just get the federal government out of our business, we can get things done. We can create jobs. Look, I've created hundreds of jobs here in Indiana and have hired hundreds of employees. Look, we have the best workforce in the world. And if we can just allow this workforce to do the job, if we can allow our companies to figure out how to get the job done, we can get it done. But we must get the federal government out of our business. And I will go to D.C. to do just that, get the federal government out of our business and off our backs and allow us to get the job done.
John Hostetler.
The North America Free Trade Agreement was not a free trade agreement. It would have been very easy in legislation to say no tariffs shall be imposed on American goods going into the other countries of North America, and no tariffs will be experienced by those exporting to the United States. It was a hundreds of pages document because it had to create an uneven playing field. Otherwise, the United States economy, manufacturing base, would have overwhelmed the economies of Mexico and Canada. And so we had to tie both arms behind our back in order for these countries to sign on. We must have agreements between our countries which recognize that U.S. jobs and U.S. interests of workers come first. We should not give away the farm, quite literally in some cases, in these agreements whenever in fact the agreements must, as a result of the nature of our economies, devalue the ability for the United States to compete.
Time, sir. Well, gentlemen, we are at the final question. It is not like Final Jeopardy, but our question comes from Anna Kroyman up in Monticello, and she couldn't make it to the WFY studios down here tonight, so I'm going to read her question exactly as she wrote it, and you will have 90 seconds. That's 90 seconds to respond, and that will also include any closing comments to the people of Indiana that you might wish to make this evening. Anna's question is, quote, "What makes you exceptional from the other four candidates that you should earn our vote?" And we've gone through the full cycle nearly twice, so we'll begin with Dan Coates.
Well, I think that what differentiates me from my colleagues here is not so much a position on domestic issues, but the foreign policy experience that I've enjoyed, first as a member of the Intelligence Committee, then as a longtime member of the Armed Services Committee, but also serving overseas, representing our country for a major ally. I've had to deal with foreign policy and national security issues on an hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis, all this during a time of war. Tough decisions, meeting with heads of government, working with our heads of government and Germany's heads of governments, trying to fashion policies and being very, very engaged in all of that. So I think that differentiates me. But let me just say this. The first and most important words of the Constitution are "we the people." And I think Washington has interpreted "we the people" to what we hear from Washington is "me the president" and "we the liberals." And at a time when they ought to be focusing on getting Americans and Hoosiers back to work, getting our economy back on track. They are pushing through massive new spending programs. Those spending programs are running us deeply into debt. Now, Hoosiers know who I am. I have served them. I'm a Ronald Reagan conservative. I'm for lower taxes. I'm for less spending. I'm for limited government. I'm for personal liberty. I'm for, faith, freedom, and family have been my guiding lights. Those lights are burning brighter than ever. We need to be a nation who has the motto of not we trust in government, but we, under God, this government can go forward. Thank you very much for talking to you. I asked the opportunity for you to vote for me on May 4th.
All right, thank you, sir. Marlon Stutzman.
Well, thank you for the question, and I respect each one of these gentlemen and have enjoyed the campaign trail alongside them. But I believe that it is important for us to look at where we are at as a nation, to realize the attack that is on our freedoms, and to realize what kind of country we're going to hand off to our children. As a fourth-generation family farmer and as a small business owner, my wife and I were married in 2000. In 2001, our firstborn son was born in August, and we were down at Florida and the day that we were attacked by terrorists on 9/11. And that day really changed my life, and realizing that my young son had his whole life in front of him. And I believed that at that time we needed to get involved and that we needed to make a difference for our country. We stood together as Americans. Well, today I believe that we are a citizenry that is very frustrated with our federal government because it continues to infringe on our freedoms and to our liberties. Our Constitution is very clear on what the federal government is designed and is structured to do. I think that it is important for us to protect that freedom for our families and for our future, to have a senator that will be responsive and will listen. As I've served in the state legislature, I've had the opportunity to see how federal government affects our state. And I think that's one thing that separates me from my colleagues, is that I understand the long arm of the federal government, how it affects our freedoms here in the state and to the state government. So I would ask for your vote on May the 4th. I would also ask you to go to my website, gomarlin.com, and thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, sir. Richard Bainey.
You know, Anna, I appreciate your question. This has been an amazing year for me, having brought the Tea Party movement and been involved with this grassroots movement here in Indiana, and then to be standing with these four other fine gentlemen. I've enjoyed getting to know each one of them. But, you know, I feel like I've been standing with four gentlemen who are applying for a government job. You know, we have three that have been there and done that, and one that's been nowhere and done little. And yet all four still have a go-along to get along attitude. You know, it doesn't make these men, you know, bad people. It just makes them politicians, and that is not what we need today. It's time to send something other than a politician and someone who will do other than go along to get along with the team. It's time to send someone who will stand up and say enough to what's happening in D.C. and change the game. You know, we have an important decision to make on May 4th. And that decision is, will we continue with politicians and politics as usual, or will we continue to write ourselves back to a path of a constitutional republic, of a government of the people and by the people and for the people, and insert we the people back into our government? Now, I ask that you stand with we the people. On May 4th, I ask that you vote for Richard Bainey. On May 4th, if you've stood at a Tea Party or been involved in this grassroots movement, I ask for your vote. I ask that you do not split the vote. On May 4th, I ask that you vote for me. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir. John Hostetler.
Thank you, Anna, for the question. Why should you vote for me, Anna? Well, when I ran for Congress for the first time in 1994, I ran to restore trust in government. And so I put down on paper my stances on issues, on very important issues. And I was told by some people who had done that before, who had been in public office before, that you can't do that. That at some time in the future, you may have to make a decision. You may have to cast a vote that deviates from these things that you put down in black and white. But, Anna, I wanted to restore trust in government. I wanted people to know that I was going to do exactly what I told them I was going to do, that if I was asked by leadership, for example, to raise taxes when I had pledged that I wouldn't, that I wouldn't do that. When I was asked to compromise on the inalienable right to life by folks in my party or even folks outside my party who said that they would let this vote pass, I would not do that, because I'm hearing all over Indiana that what Hoosiers are longing for is a voice not only for the conservative values that we all espouse, but a voice that will be consistent when I go to Washington, that I will do in Washington exactly what I said I will do. Because if we do not have that trust, Anna, if you and I do not have that trust, then we will never be able to make the very difficult decisions necessary to put America back on the right track.
Thank you, sir. Don Bates.
First of all, Amos, thank you for your graciousness tonight. You've been a tremendous host. Thank you very much. Anna, thank you for the question. Anna, 3 of my colleagues, especially in the past few days, have worked very hard to earn the support of Washington to win this nomination. I must say to you, I don't believe Washington should choose this nominee. I believe it should be Hoosiers all across this great state. I'm a financial advisor, Anna. I'm not a politician. I believe I have the greatest grasp of the fiscal disaster that's facing our nation and how we have to fix it if our nation is going to be preserved. Fellow Hoosiers, let me tell you, our nation's in a time of crisis. We stand at a crossroads. Down one path is a European socialistic state. Down another path is Reagan's shining city on a hill. If you'll elect me on May the 4th and then in November, I promise to lead the charge to Reagan's shining city on a hill. I leave you tonight with this Reagan quote. Ronald Reagan said, "Let us be sure that those who come after us will say of us in their time that in our time we did everything that could be done. We finished the race, we kept them free, and we kept the faith." I'm Don Bates, Jr. I hope you'll vote for me on May the 4th. God bless Indiana. God bless the United States of America.
Gentlemen, thank you for a spirited discussion. I know that our viewers and listeners all across the great Hoosier state enjoyed it and enjoyed listening to all of you. Thanks to all of you for watching or listening to our U.S. Senate debate sponsored by the Indiana Debate Commission. Our thanks to the candidates and their staff, and to WFYI here in Indianapolis for hosting and producing this program. And special thanks to the voters who asked the question. And speaking of voters, primary day is Tuesday, May the 4th. Get your ID together and go vote for one of these 5 individuals. And look for news from the Indiana Debate Commission about debates coming this fall. I'm Amos Brown from Indianapolis. Good night.